Welcome to my commute, Nicole. I keep telling everybody, see, this is what it's like for me the other way around.
The traffic was horrible there.
Yes, it is. Sometimes I'll call Laura and say, well, I made it as far as 41st, run up the stairs to that meeting.
Yeah.
And is Molly? She's not here. She's not coming. Okay. Do you have a copy of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll hand it to you. 'Cause I'm doing the same thing. Yeah, because I'm pulling mine up, so I'll just use yours.
Yeah, I got it here. I just,
Oh, these two.
even after our conversation, I said I was gonna bring the agenda. I did, but didn't get up there.
We got your back.
Love it. Okay. All right, I'd like to call the meeting of the Library Facilities Financing Authority to order. So we have a roll call, please.
Board member Templeton sitting in for Huffaker. Here. Board member Legault, who's absent. Board member Goldstein.
Here,
I'm sorry, board member Colburn.
Here.
do we have any additional materials?
There were no.
Okay. That takes us to the additions or deletions. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to public comment. Public comment is the opportunity for any member of the public to address this board on any item listed on the consent calendar, library director report, or not listed on today's agenda. Have any public comment? Seeing none in the room. Is there any online? Okay.
We're not doing hybrid, so.
We're not doing hybrid. Thank you for reminding me, my mistake. Okay, I'll close public comment. That takes us to the library director report. We're on page 5. Do you have any oral additions?
Just want to highlight the last comment on my report. We are looking at another lighting solution for the interior of Scotts Valley Library, which is still very dim. It's like the last effort. So that's the only addition from the last version.
All right. Well, having gone through lighting challenges in public spaces, took me, I think, 3 tries before I got it right in our city council chamber. So if you're on number 2, you're doing good. Okay, with that, I will take us to item 6, which is the consent calendar. We have, I believe, we get it wrong. 3 items listed on today's consent calendar. Do any of the board members want to pull any item for consent for further discussion, or is there a motion to approve consent?
I'll move consent agenda.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll do a voice vote on this. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Consent calendar passes unanimously. That takes us to our next item, which is our general business. And the first item listed on general business is hidden underneath the tab. It is the annual election of board chair and vice chair. We have a rotation schedule for this, and I believe it is now time this year for Santa Cruz and Scotts Valley to take over the chair and vice chair. Do we have any questions from board members? Okay, seeing none, do we have any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion or action.
I just want to make, since Matt's not here, Michelle, will you be okay chairing? Or I know when we've done this in the past, the outgoing chair, Amy, would be able to continue chairing for the rest of the meeting, so.
Happy to do that if you want. We can do the vote. I can wrap up this meeting and then we hand the baton to Matt next meeting.
Yeah.
Or you can.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
That
well,
works.
Okay.
I'll move approval of the recommended action.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Did you
Okay,
take public comment?
I did. I did. Okay, so Matt Huffaker will be our chair and Molly Legault will be our vice chair. And as the outgoing chair, I will just wrap up this meeting for us today. So that takes us to item B, which is an interesting one. It's member allocations. It has to do with the distribution of the remaining tax funds. We have a staff presentation, please.
Good morning, Edith Driscoll, your controller treasurer. In the audience today, joining us is Suzanne Harrell, our financial advisor for the LFFA. And we have a memo that she has provided in your packet. And at this time, I would ask her to join us at the podium to make her presentation. Here's your podium. Chair, Ish, and members of the board. As you know, the CFD was formed in 2016, and you've been using the annual special tax to pay both debt service on bonds issued to fund new library projects, and any surplus has been distributed among the members until you reach a total allocation between special taxes and bonds of 77,500,000. There's an item on your agenda after this about the third bond issuance. And with that issuance, you will have reached the 77,500,000 to be allocated among the members in accordance with the percentages you agreed to many years ago. I know this question always comes up. What is the surplus special tax that's going to remain after this third series of bonds? And I've done this calculation based on this year's revenue. And there's about $1.3 million in annual surplus taxes. And you can do a couple things with that. You can just allocate it among the members in accordance with your existing percentages. So everybody gets some pay-go money every year from the surplus, or you still have a little bit of bonding capacity left. And my memo kind of points out why you still have bonding capacity left. And you can actually maybe increase the amount of bonds that are contemplated in your next agenda item if you want to issue additional bonds today to take advantage of some of that surplus tax if you had a capital project that you wanted to spend on. So that concludes the information to be presented, and I'm certainly available for any questions. And I do have a handout that has kind of what the distribution of the annual surplus special tax would be among the members, if that would be of interest.
Okay, do we have any questions from board members? I have questions, but anyone else have questions?
I do want to ask if your calculation shows the $28 million being able to be generated in addition to what we've already allocated, but we would raise the total allocation by 30 million. Is that just, was your estimate conservative? So you're rounding up, or?
Right, so my estimate is based on today's revenue, which means no more additional units. So I kind of threw in maybe 200 more residential units a year for the remaining, and it kind of came out to be about 30 million. So I wanted to give you a little bit of room there instead of being so close that maybe, you know, in 17 years, you're back again to increase your allocation. You might be anyway, if the, development occurs faster than that, but that was the reason for bumping it to 30, was to kind of capture any future development.
Okay, thank you for that.
Question? So a couple questions, and was there a cap on the total debt that was included in the voter measure?
Yes, it's 67 million.
Okay. And are we within, we would be within that?
Right, after this third issuance, there'll still be about 14 million of authorization left. Now, based on your revenue stream, you can only really capitalize on 11 million of that.
I see.
Because of the, the limits on the revenues. But yes, there's still more room under the cap. And again, it's because interest rates were lower than maybe we did when, we projected what you were going to borrow back in 2016. We were able to get surety bonds instead of cash funding or reserve funding for bonds. That added capacity. We're in a situation where bonds are being issued at premiums. And so that reduces, while it increases the interest rate, it reduces the actual bond amount. So there's a couple of reasons why, you didn't use the whole 67 million for the projects that.
Yeah, my memory is we said the 7 million is kind of a pie in the sky number that we didn't actually think we would be able to approach. And then you're assuming, a 1:10 coverage ratio
Yes.
with today's rates.
Mhm.
Okay. And then last question, and this may be more directed to the city of Santa Cruz, is, I think there's two parts of the question is, from a revenue standpoint for the LFFA, is there a timing need to do this? Like if we don't do it, all of a sudden you're gonna be getting tax revenue and have nowhere to put it? Or is that day far in the future?
So I'm going to say that this year, this fiscal year, is pretty much locked up. Because you're gonna be issuing the bonds for the Santa Cruz project coming up. Next year will be the year where the surplus really kicks in.
Okay, okay, so about a year to get it done in terms of just not having more revenue in than we have a plan to allocate. And then the second part of the question, I think, is for the city of Santa Cruz is, I've heard you have a project that you want to talk about. Do you have a feeling about kind of the timing on when you want the money?
I think that's on our agenda.
Oh, yeah. I know, but it relates to this because if we're talking about also sort of the timing of changing the 11 million, I think with changing the 11 million would be changing 11 million. What I mean by that is increasing this amount of available. Would we be doing that in this item? No.
Not for this item. This is just your,
Oh,
are you going to increase the
Overall.
allocation and then the process you have to go through to do that?
okay,
I think what you're trying to ask is, so City of Santa Cruz wants to bond for almost 13 million.
yeah,
But if they have additional need to raise that bond issuance, then how much? Sounds like we can go up to an additional 11 more potentially. Is that correct?
Well, you could, but you wouldn't want to allocate all of that to the city of Santa Cruz because that would impair everybody else's share of the surplus that
Right.
they're due under the formula. So there's about 5 million of capacity for the city of Santa Cruz's surplus, share of the surplus.
Okay.
So it would really be about 5 million.
Okay, well,
Of the
that's helpful
11.
to know.
that is. And is that ratio? I mean, I know that the ratio of how the funding is allocated is written into the JPA. Is the allocation of how the bond capacity is allocated, is that written into the JPA or is that, okay, so that's more of just an agreement
It's
among the
just
parties?
part of the 77.5, however you want to fund that. And
Yeah.
right now you'll have funded that. So you're resetting to zero for the percentage surplus.
Okay. Okay, well, it sounds like maybe on the next item, we can chew on that a little bit more.
But I guess the question still stands is if the city of Santa Cruz is short funding. I mean, it seems like it would be imperative for them to want to raise these caps to try to get at that additional money for the bond issuance. So is there still money you're in need of for the project?
I think that's not something I have all the details to be able to
Yeah.
share today, but I think that would definitely be a discussion maybe if we build off of the next agenda item.
So
If I could
Oh,
add, I did reach out and speak with your project manager and he assured me that if 5 million was available, he would be happy to take 7 to 11 million. So he didn't have any concern that he was very confident that he would be able to use that 5 million if in the event. We go back to the recommendation of this board item, and this recommendation was direct staff to draft amendments to the agreement to to maximize the distribution. So if we can make that determination here before, the next item is about bonding. This is about, they're really two, in my mind, two separate actions. But to answer the question of, is there a need? Yes, he assured me, Brian assured me there was need.
Okay. Okay, well, so it sounds like the action here, she just said, his date though is to change the maximum available for distribution by 30 million, which as Director Coburn pointed out, it's 2 million more than we would get today under the current tax, but assuming some reasonable level of growth. And it also includes an action in the same percentage, so we wouldn't touch the existing distribution formula in the drafted documents. Okay, and so you had said that we do have. It's not like it needs to be done tomorrow. The next LFFA meeting is May 1st. If we, okay, so that would be when this would come back.
I think that if we directed staff to draft an amendment.
It has to go to all of
It has
us.
to go
Yes,
through the
yes.
county board of supervisors and each of the city councils, so I think, Scott Ferguson had worked with us on my first supplement, so this would be the second supplement to raise the caps again.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm gonna go ahead and pass out, this just gives you an idea of how much surplus is available under the original formula.
So in theory, we could draft an amendment, take it, and then bring back.
The amendment to this board, look at it and then send it to our legislative bodies over the summer.
Or I think the direction is to do it before the next meeting.
Right, to do it very
Before
quickly.
May, yes,
Before May.
so that potentially the bond issuance could be adjusted if necessary.
Yeah. Okay,
And if I could just add to that as your treasurer, financially, it makes more sense to just try and do one bond issuance, not one now and then a smaller one later.
yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. There's just a lot of moving pieces right now with library financing, so I'm trying to think about in my head how they're all lining up. All right, before we do further discussion, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. So the recommendation here is to direct staff to prepare the JPA amendment, and then it sounds like the thought would be, it would be the same distribution as the prior formula. We wouldn't change that, we just basically changing the top line number, which then flows through all of our distributions. And the expectation would be that without us meeting again, we would start taking that to our councils and boards for adoption. Okay.
Should we ask Scott Ferguson, who's here, to clarify that process?
So it would need to go to each of the four boards. I'm not recalling whether this board needs to approve it first or last. It's the JPA agreement, meaning this body is not a party to that. So it's really the four members, their approval is what's needed.
To clarify, Scott Ferguson is our bond counsel on this item.
Yeah,
Introduced him.
well,
I mean, I think in the past, this board has weighed in on the caps, and that's what I think, see this action being, is we're discussing it. If we're supportive of drafting amendments, that's not to say they're approved yet, because they still have to go through our bodies
yeah,
for our cities and the county. So there's still steps to take.
yeah. Yeah, I have no reticence about increasing the maximum distribution. We're in the midst, for those of you that don't know, our library financing agreement, which is a separate JPA, which has to do with kind of the contributions in to fund the operations of the library, not to fund the facilities. That's a large question that's outstanding as that agreement is expiring, and just thinking about the different pieces that are moving. I'd be open to a discussion about the percentage of the existing distributions in in sort of the overall context, but I'm also fine moving forward as it stands today, because there's obviously the opportunity to tweak things, you know, at the various city councils, you know, so.
Yeah, we as a county, I think, would advocate for keeping the allocations and not changing them. Because there could very well be capital needs in the future that our branches
Oh, I
will,
understand. Yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah, I understand.
So again, this surplus is for capital and, you know, pay-go or bonding. It's not for operations. So.
Right, no, yeah, I understand that, but we do have a separate agreement that covers operations,
Right.
and that one is expiring as well. All right, well. I think I've made my point, and at the end of the day, it'll come down to what the agreements that get adopted by the various parties, so. I'm ready to move forward if the rest of the board is.
Okay.
I mean, that's a separate process that we're still
Right,
discussing, right?
Right.
So that'll be separate from this motion.
Right. Well, I'm comfortable moving the recommended action to direct staff to prepare an amendment or a second supplement, whatever we choose to call it, increasing the maximum distribution by the 30 million according to the same percentages.
we have a motion. Is there a second?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've taken public comment. If there's no further discussion. Council, would you like a voice vote on this or a roll call?
Voice vote is fine.
Okay. Take a voice vote then. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Is that a unanimous vote?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. The motion carries unanimously. Okay, so that takes us to item C, which is approval of special tax bonds for phase 3 funding of library facility. Do we have a staff report, please?
Again, Edith Driscoll, your treasurer, and also, again, next to me is Suzanne Harold, your LFFA financial advisor. And I will again turn it over to herself. And then also I do want to make sure Scott Ferguson, our bond counsel, is here in the audience in the event we need to ask him any questions. Thank you, Suzanne.
So the documentation for this third phase bond issue was to capture kind of all the remaining allocation that's payable to the city of Santa Cruz so they could complete their financing of their downtown library project. There was a small amount of pay-go left to distribute to Scotts Valley. But this would basically get everyone to their $77,500,000, their share of that allocation. The bonds were expected to be issued in about a par amount of about $13 million. The effective rate was going to be about 4.14%. And that's a 22-year bond issue. With all the cost of issuance added in, including all the costs, the rate was about 4.3% effective. The resolutions before you approve a not to exceed bond amount of $14 million. Now, if you choose to raise that cap for some additional funding that you expect to provide to the city of Santa Cruz, I think Scott and I have decided you probably need to defer the issuance of you can vote today to increase the not to exceed amount, so that you don't have to come back for more approvals, but you actually can't issue the bonds, I think, until you amend the JPA agreement to allow more than 77.5 to be allocated among the members. So that does affect the timing of when the city will receive the bond proceeds from this series of bonds. So I'm not quite sure. I know they're working on their parking district financing, and that's going to close sometime in mid-April. This was going to close a little bit ahead of that. So I don't know how long it's going to take for your JPA amendment process to be complete, so these bonds could be issued in the higher amount.
Okay. Are there questions?
Does Does the city of Santa Cruz know how long we could delay before bonding? I don't know if you have any idea as to your cash flow needs, although,
I would have to check back with finance, and I know we're looking into parking, so,
yeah.
that's an important really.
Do you know when the library project portion is supposed to get up and running, or maybe Christopher, if Michelle doesn't know?
You mean in terms of when shovel gets ground?
Yeah,
In late spring?
late spring.
Oh, I thought you.
Late spring this year, late spring.
If we're talking construction, it starts at like May, June. Fencing goes up around the site. Shovel gets ground for phase one of the building project.
Yeah, we were trying to time it because they have some agreements with the developer who's doing the housing component, and they got their tax credits and they need to start within a certain time frame. So we were kind of all dovetailing towards getting the money to the city by April.
But in my conversations with your project manager, you have your funding complete for phase one.
Phase one.
Yes.
Your funding is complete for phase one. We were going to dovetail, but you do have your funding already. So that this delay wouldn't delay that.
Phase two, this funding will be for phase two.
It would be needed at phase two.
Is there an anticipated construction start date for that?
Over a year out. from
Okay.
The original phase one, that's my understanding.
Okay, so conceivably, sounds like we have a bit of time here to fund phase two. And to summarize, the way it's written today, the bond issue would raise 12.9 million for improvements. That number could go up by about 11 million, probably a little less minus the percentages for issuance and things like that, subject to the legislative bodies approving the JPA amendments. Is that city manager summary reasonably correct?
So you could increase it, the not to exceed amount by 11 million, but you probably should increase it by what you expect to fund.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I get
Yeah,
it.
I don't know. I heard 5 million is maybe what we,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I get that. I mean, I just think that there is a conversation to be had about where debt is needed versus pay go.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay. And so the suggestion from bond council is, given that we moved item B forward, we really can't start this until we have the approval from all the city councils and the board of supervisors?
The bond issuance itself be, delayed until we have an amendment to the JPA agreement, because that's the certainty that we need, that all the bond proceeds will be spent. Have the amendment, have some, right, some stranded bond proceeds.
I have a question, another question for Scott, and that's, can this, depending on timing, our next meeting is May, so if need be, if we needed a special meeting, can a resolution be adopted at a special meeting?
Yeah, for a CFD bond like this, yes.
Okay.
Good question.
Mhm.
Okay. And given the moving pieces, is the staff recommendation at this point to adopt this resolution or to punt?
I think you would need to amend the resolution instead of not to exceed 14 million, like you say. Add the additional capacity and say not approve not to exceed, say 25 million. And then at your next meeting, you could direct staff to say, okay, but we only want to issue 5 million more.
Great, yeah, no.
But at least you wouldn't have to come back and deal with the approval of the bond issuance. again.
Okay.
So our recommendation is to defer this.
No, to amend the resolution,
Change the
to
14 to
change the
25.
14 to
Today?
25.
I was asking if
Right.
that was staff's
I thought
recommendation.
we were deferring. We're not.
It can be either, if the timing works, it can be either way, and Suzanne, I'm thinking about the good faith estimates.
Mhm.
Which will, at least a couple of them will change, right? Actually, most of them will change based on a higher amount. So it may be better to defer the resolution until a special meeting.
yes.
It can be a special.
I think I mean, deferring and then bringing it back with the actual amount seems pending what we actually do in the revised amendment seems most logical to me. So right now, we're just guessing.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and I don't want to burn staff time and bond council time and things like that, working off numbers that we may ultimately not choose. So. For clarity again, is staff recommendation at this point to hunt.
Defer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Delay.
The fiscal word would be
Delay.
defer.
Let's work my political speeches here.
Super Bowl's coming up, so I
Yeah,
get it.
All right, okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't think I've gone to public comment on those?
No, you have not.
Okay, thank you, guys. Do we have any public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board for possible action and a potential deferral. I don't know that we actually need any action.
I mean, I think if City of Santa Cruz is okay with deferring, that seems like that's what we should do.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we'd be going back to our boards and councils and then coming back and making a decision after that discussion's been had,
Yeah,
ending JPA discussion.
Right.
yeah. I'm comfortable with that approach, and if we need a special meeting to move things along, you know, my experience just in large construction projects is probably the same as yours, is that there's always a rush to get the money, and then you end up getting the money, and then it takes a long time to spend it because construction takes a long time. And it's hard.
Yeah.
And PG. All right,
So we're just gonna take no action, or do we need, do you need a motion or anything to defer? Okay,
okay. So if there's consensus on the board, it sounds like we're ready to move off this item, deferring, taking no action. We're all good? With that, then, I will take us to the next item on the agenda, which is project updates and comments by board members. Are there any projects, updates, or comments?
I just, for the Santa Cruz, branches, Santa Cruz County and the branches in the unincorporated area, or the library fund, so Capitola in particular, I just wanted to note that we're exploring solar at both Capitola and Felton. And part of that will be potentially funded with Friends money, and part of that with leftover funds from our capital projects. So it's something that we've always wanted to do, but didn't initially have the money for based on project costs, that it now seems now we might. So we're moving forward on that piece.
Okay, one suggestion or one thought, might be that in the course of those conversations, potentially we could invite somebody from our community power provider, Central Coast Community Energy, who have a lot of experts in this space, might be able to advise us kind of on the, you know, from a public agency perspective, you know, maybe some different approaches to this. I'd be happy to help facilitate that.
Yeah,
That would be helpful.
yeah.
Okay,
And I should note, we're also looking at battery backup for batteries and permanent generators too, because of all the power outages.
yeah, that makes,
Food storage.
Mhm.
okay. Are there any other updates or comments? Seeing none, takes us to the next item, which is our scheduled upcoming meetings. It looks like our next meeting will be May 1st and at Scotts Valley. Remind Matt that that's not in Felton. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be there. I have been in Main Branch before when we were meeting here, and I got, yes, so I've done it as well. Okay, so with that, our meeting of the LFFA board is adjourned. Kick off our next meeting, which is the library's joint powers authority. I'll call that meeting to order. I will note that the same members are still present from our last meeting. And that will take us to additional materials. Are there any additional materials today?  'Seeing none. Any changes to the agenda? Okay. That takes us to public comment. This is the opportunity for public to comment on any items that are listed on today's consent calendar or within the library jurisdiction that are not listed on today's agenda. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Takes us to our library director's report. You have anything to add, Mr.
Yeah,
Director?
So I've submitted a written report, 3 things I just want to highlight from that report. Currently, we're in the process of interviewing for the new assistant director of libraries. We've had round 1 interviews with a really marvelous slate of candidates, and we're going to have final interviews on Monday morning. So hopefully that will wrap up very shortly. The second thing is I wanted to point out, we were talking about the downtown library project. We were working with the Friends of the Library System on a community engagement event at the end of April on the site of the new library in that parking lot, a family-oriented event for an afternoon and Saturday with food trucks and what have you. Those details are coming together and we're starting individual conversations with stakeholders in Santa Cruz just to make sure they're up to speed. And then we'll be publicizing that and inviting everyone. So it'd be really great. It'd be an opportunity to do some real community engagement in that part of the city where we don't traditionally have as much engagement as we do in other communities. And then the last thing that I wanted to highlight is we are headfirst diving into a website migration project. You guys might remember our library website is homegrown, largely with the skills of one staff member who retired last year. So we are on the hook basically to migrate to something that's more sustainable. And we are in the middle of vendor presentations right now and gathering quotes to understand our next steps to migrate the library website. That'll be a project that will probably take us into the summer. So that's pushing out our strategic planning process by a couple of months so that we don't have staff trying to do 2 very big things at once. Those are the things I wanted to highlight from my report. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from board members? I just wanted to comment on one of the programs, it sounds like that's being offered, an adult program being offered in Capitola has to do with helping older folks like myself using AI in your job search. And, you know, I guess I think that's great. I mean, I think that, you know, even in an organization like Capitola, you know, we're sort of we're utilizing AI in different ways each and every day. And some of our staff members are teaching the other ones because it's like, whoa, that's a really cool tool. And I think that probably there's a lot of people in our community who don't have access to that kind of sort of on the job training. And so there's amazing tools out there and I can imagine a lot of our community can be left behind pretty quickly. And so to the extent that there's opportunities like that to help folks who are maybe not as engaged in the workforce or getting the opportunity to learn, I think some of these AI tools are really cool. It can also be a little intimidating to approach for folks without a little bit of an introduction. So
Absolutely.
okay. I don't think that was really a question. Maybe it was more. If there's no further questions or comments, is there any public comment on the library director report? Seeing none, take us to the next item. Friends, we have a friends report.
There'll be no oral report at this meeting.
Okay. Takes us to our LAC. Do we have an LAC rep here this morning?
Nope.
Okay. So the next item on today's agenda is the consent calendar. The consent calendar, we have items A through J. Does anyone want to pull any of the items from consent for further discussion?
Could I just ask a question
Yes.
about, the circulation? I'm just wondering if the Live Oak branch numbers reflect the annex or if those are gonna be tracked somehow?
Those are being tracked separately and right now they're kind of by now they're probably triple digits.
Okay,
Nicole, it's very
Very
much a
small.
handful.
yeah,
So we were gonna start inserting them when we actually had a number that we could kind of track over
Okay.
time, probably in the next 2 to 3 months.
I'm just interested to see kind of the impact that that's having and thinking through what that means for that area of the county as well as other areas
Yeah.
that could benefit from
Yeah.
similar kinds of services.
Entirely. And
Yeah.
our experience to date is it's more of a drop-off location
Mm,
than people actually picking up physical items. The book drop gets used quite a bit.
okay.
Okay. Interesting. A lot of data in here. Okay, so with that, do we have a motion to approve consent?
Second,
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Takes us to our next order of business, which is election of chair and vice chair for this next year. Do we have is there any discussion? Sir, or questions? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for possible action.
I'll move approval of the recommended action.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. And do we want to continue with the same process that we used for the last meeting?
Yes.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so Matt and Molly are chair and vice chair respectively, moving forward for 25. I'll continue the role here for this meeting, remainder of this meeting. Our next order of business is our budget assumptions for the upcoming fiscal year. And we have a staff presentation, please.
We do, I have a report that I'll speak to. It's the last 2 pages in the packet. If you're looking for those pages, just go right to the very end. And this is based on, I went back through previous years' board calendars for budget prep, and it seemed like the budget assumptions conversation was always scheduled for this meeting. So I included this here. And the big changes for the next fiscal year are one, at least that we've already contemplated in a special meeting in December. The services cost to the city of Santa Cruz for their support for HR and finance will raise significantly to either 989,000 or up to 1.2 million, depending on what the negotiations arrive at. That's an increase from the about 600 some odd that we paid last year. So that's a pretty significant annual increase that the library will be absorbing going forward, that we're budgeting for this next fiscal year. And then the other big ticket item for this next fiscal year, which is most of the cost is a one-time cost, is the city of Santa Cruz is moving to work-based solutions. So our share of the FTE percentage contribution for that effort is around 464,000. On top of that, there's a 53,000 subscription cost on top of that. So the one-time cost is a little over $500,000 for next fiscal year, and then that drops down to about 400 or 44,000, about 44,492 as an annual subscription cost in years going out. And I will comment that that's about $10,000 less than the cost that's currently incurred through that effort. So it lands us in a better place, but there is an initial cost that we will be accommodating next year. So overall, these are 2 very big ticket items which could land us about $1.5 million over what we would have done last year. So I just wanted to call those things out. I think the other thing that is an unknown, so it's not included here, we will be renegotiating MOUs with the 3 partners. So that's what has some implications as well.
And the MOE formula is expiring.
Right. which is brought out in the,
Yeah.
But that's all about to be negotiated.
Okay. So are there any questions from board members?
For the 1.5 million, is that just salary and benefit costs current, or does it include an assumption of the labor agreement negotiations? I'm just trying to clarify what's in there. Could the cost be higher than 1.5 million?
The cost could be higher.
Okay,
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for clarifying.
And the 1.5 is a cumulative total of both potential service contract increases the Eden switch, which is one time.
Correct.
And then basically cost of living, COLA adjustments, things like that in the next MOU.
Correct.
Okay. And it,
So in the out years, to kind of build on that to further clarify, that's one time next year, the out year from that, we'll pull the implementation for the workday out. So then you're just paying for the administrative services cost and the annual subscription, which will probably be around $1 million. Depending on it's negotiated.
do you remember offhand what our sort of amount of fund balance beyond the policy reserve levels?
As the last report we had was from early summer, correct, Kira? So at that time it was, I'm sorry,
June 30th.
yeah, so at that time it was around 8 million.
8 million beyond the policy
Beyond the
reserve?
policy reserve, correct? So some of this come out of that.
Wow.
It-
I definitely,
Wait, that's a much bigger number than I
that's a very
remember.
big reserve.
I thought it was,
Yeah, it's on the dashboard report in the
Yeah.
packet from June.
okay,
I mean, I hope that
Okay.
we can use fund balance to fund the one-time costs for the ERP implementation so that we can use our ongoing revenue for ongoing costs. And I mean, I think I would like to see us make that assumption for the budget development.
yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think we've talked about that in past budgets, is trying to sort of really kind of break out the difference between an ongoing expenditure and a one-time.
Right.
Because the one-time stuff, we have fund balance, the 8 million. That sounds to me like everything, including our policy reserves, but regardless, that's a big number.
We'll confirm for you.
Yeah, just so that we, because they're kind of like, they're just different flavors of money.
Yeah.
And making sure that that's really clear. And then also just noting that, we haven't landed on a new service contract and, we had that report that presented different scenarios with different costs, but at the end of the day, we're gonna need to come to an agreement with the city of Santa Cruz about what that figure looks like. So I appreciate the transparency and sort of showing kind of where we land pending that number.
Right.
All right. And then I guess my last question is at this point, you're not proposing any other sort of staffing changes that kind of affect the overall big picture top line numbers in a significant way.
Not in this report. No. I think the one thing that's not included in this report, because we don't have enough information to include it, is there will be a cost with the website migration, and that can come out of one-time fund balance as well.
Yeah,
But that's not a big, massive number.
yeah.
Were there any other one-time costs not delineated here, either for equipment or
Yeah,
facilities or, no?
there's always, I mean, it's only Thursday,
Yeah.
that's what the rain is doing to something today, we'll find out, there's always facilities.
Okay.
Yeah. So one suggestion or thought is, I know we've established a facilities fund in the budget.
Mhm.
And we've been regularly putting, is it $200,000, Kira, into the facilities fund? Is that
I think it's grown to 250 now.
250? Are we making allocations out of it in this year's budget, or is at this point, is it?
It's used as we need, and then if there's a balance left at the end of the fiscal year, we'll move it into our separate capital account to save for later, if something comes up later.
Okay. Do we do anything similar at all for tech? Do we have like a,
Don't, because we end up using everything we budget for tech replacement
yeah,
each year.
so one idea, I think probably I'm sure in your jurisdictions, because in my little jurisdiction, we do this, is we have basically an internal service fund for technology to try to normalize these costs. And so we look at all of our stuff like, a new website every 5 years and enterprise software every 10 and all that other stuff. And so it's kind of just becomes more of a normal expenditure every year that you're putting whatever it is, for me, it's whatever, $400,000 a year. And for the county, it's probably $4 million a year. And then instead of having these sort of swings year to year, so maybe something to consider as the budget's developed is trying to look at that and come up with a way to not.
Right.
I mean, it's fine if we have a ton of reserves, it doesn't matter that much, but if we get to a point down the road where we're operating closer to a policy reserve level, that could be a little bit more of a challenge.
It's certainly more plannable.
Yeah, strategic.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any public comment on the budget assumptions that were presented today? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Bring it back to the board. I don't know that we need an action on this, but does any board member have any further comments or wish to make an action? Take an action.
I don't think I have an action at this time necessarily. Yeah,
All right. Well, with that, then I will move us to the last item on today's agenda, which is sustainable promotion. And do we have a presentation, Smart, please?
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. I'm really excited to be here and present in front of you and share what my library promotional merchandise proposal is all about. And before I get started, I'd like to ask you a question. How many times have you attended a community event, excuse me, a conference or anything of that sort, and you come back with a bag full of items that may end up forgotten at the bottom of a drawer or perhaps in the trash? That is the core of what this is about. And so I'm glad I asked that question because it's more common than none. I also want to share a very sobering statistic. Every day, the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic are dumped in the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes. This is from the UN Environment Program. This is a very sobering statistic. Plastic pollution is a global problem. Every year, 19 to 23 million tons of plastic waste leaks into aquatic systems, polluting lakes, rivers, and seas. So, this is at the core of what this proposal is about. Santa Cruz Public Libraries is taking action in reducing plastic pollution. And this is done in rethinking our promotional merchandise or swag. We understand that these items are important in the process of merchandising and marketing a brand. However, we do want to reduce the single-use plastic pieces and things that we give away as part of our community engagement efforts. So at the bottom of it all is, how can our brand be effective while also being environmentally and fiscally responsible? And it all starts with a why. So as I began as community relations specialist for Santa Cruz Public Libraries, I started reviewing current practices for distribution of merchandise at events. And I learned that there wasn't necessarily one. There wasn't a strategic plan for purchasing and also distributing these items. And mainly this was just so how were we engaging with the community and how was this being done? So part of this also was defining what community engagement is versus outreach. I got these definitions from the American Library Association. I'll be sharing those with you shortly. But mainly what's at the bottom of this is the crucial role that our libraries play in our community, but also how we can engage our patrons at events or would-be patrons at events to teach or to share more about our programs and our events at these events. At the bottom of this is our staff presence. They are our strongest marketing tool, and also how we can support them and get them through these events by enlarging or rather amplifying our brand without necessarily giving away an item. So as I mentioned, I wanted to share these definitions. Outreach are the services for those who are frequent users or non-users, or services for those who are traditionally underserved. Outreach is what our bookmobile does and our outreach teams do beyond our branches. And these definitions are used interchangeably. And so that's why I felt it was important to make the differentiation, because what we're aiming for is community engagement, which is the process of working collaboratively with community members to address issues for the betterment of the community. So when we go out into the community, we're aiming for community engagement. We're not necessarily doing outreach, although, as I mentioned, these are used interchangeably. So as I said previously, upon my arrival in October of 2023, I learned that there was no strategy for purchasing or distributing merchandise material. And so through a general assessment, I determined that this needed to be done, given that it didn't exist. It is under our marketing budget to purchase merchandise or branded merchandise. And so within that budget, I want to be conscious of what we buy and what we distribute. Also, because these items were purchased without a rationale, this gave way to having an idea of buying items that are more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and as I mentioned at the beginning, using less plastic. Ultimately, the need of a well-developed promotional merchandise strategy involving an eco-conscious approach also ties in with keeping the public interest and the public good in mind. And so being fiscally responsible, also keeping the public good, the public greater good in mind. And so that's what takes us to engagement with purpose. What is the solution? The idea is that we engage directly with the public. When we go to these events, the idea is to share with them about our programs and services, what we offer at our libraries, and hopefully get folks that may not come to our branches to come to our branches. But the idea is the human contact. It isn't so much the item that you give away that makes a person to come in, but it's the interaction that you have with them that makes them think, oh, maybe I should go to the library. Maybe I should attend that program. Maybe I would be interested in reading more about X, Y, or Z. So that was the idea of this proposal, that rather than giving an item, you give an interaction. You give that person something that will bring them back to us. So what is the goal? I also learned through my research that the library in their strategic plan had a goal of being more to reduce their carbon footprint by the middle of 2026. And so this aligns with our strategic plan in aiming for that carbon footprint, reducing our carbon footprint. Clearly, this is just a small part of what can be done within the organization as a whole, but I felt it was a good start. Also, I consulted with Dr. Weiss-West with the city of Santa Cruz in terms of whether this would work, not just for the library, but for the city itself. And it started a great conversation. In fact, after I met with her, there was a conversation with the purchasing department, whether this could become an APO, just something that makes a larger effect, not just for the library itself, but also for the city. We ultimately all live in this planet. And so whatever we can do to help it, it would be great. There were also conversations with the SCPL of creating an environmental committee, that this would support not only the marketing department, but also the organization as a whole in ways that we can reduce waste, that we can be more eco-conscious. And ultimately, in order to amplify the SCPL brand, create a marketing strategy that introduces this plan within the community in a staggered way, but also that continues to amplify that message of being environmentally conscious and environmentally friendly. And ultimately, like I mentioned too, the idea of amplifying the brand for the library is this meaningful connections with the community, creating that human connection. So what is part of the idea? We've had one of these price wheels that were used at tabling events. I have purchased 3 more for this, but the purpose is not to have them at the table so people spin the wheel and just get a prize. It's rather an engagement tool. And so as you can see in the picture, some of the areas where you can fall into are saying, I love my library, or asking people, what is your favorite genre, or who's your favorite author? And there are just 3 spots where you can win. And the prices are staggered in 3 different levels. There are a higher level, a middle level, and a low level. And so there are only 3 opportunities to get these items. But at the bottom of this is that merchandise is the exception, not the rule. And spinning the wheel would happen at the end of the interaction. It wouldn't just be like, oh, hey, we're at the library, you want to stop by and spin the wheel? But rather, hi, I'm Ana Maria, I'm with the library. When was the last time you visited one of our branches? What is your favorite branch? And, did you know that we have a program for kids every day at 11 o'clock is our story time? And that starts the conversation. And then at the end, you can ask the person, would you like to spin our wheel? And then they spin the wheel. And if they're lucky that day and they get a prize, I have categories. I don't know if you can see in the picture, but it's a little bit of a cheat sheet that determines whether it's a high level prize, a middle level prize, or a low level prize. I am also in the process of developing a guide for the folks that will table at our event. So then they don't find themselves, what do I ask you? But rather there's a guideline for questions and things that folks can share with. So, as I was saying, these wheels, we have 4 of them now, and we would allocate one to each of our regions. So then when folks go to table events within those regions, they would have one of these 2 use. So where are we? We are currently assessing our merchandise. There were items left behind from my predecessor that we've been slowly but surely sharing for some events. And as I also mentioned, we've been categorizing what we would identify as low-level merchandise, middle and high level, because then this will enable us to find vendors. And by vendors, I mean also folks that sell items that are recycled or from sustainable sources, and reducing plastic use. That's where we need to go next. But also, we're trying to define with the adult programs teams and the youth programs teams, which events they're planning to attend on a given year. So then we can determine items that they need to take with them and plan more strategically how we're going to do these staplings. So from that, we need to find vendors. Granted, these items are a little bit pricier, but that's where the exception, not the rule, comes in. We wouldn't be buying an infinite amount of items to store. It would just have to be more thought out and strategic. So then we're not just buying things that we're sitting on, but also not giving away things without an idea. There's also the distribution strategy, which I mean, I still need to work with the adults programs teams and the youth programs teams, learning which programs they're planning to table at, how many people they expect that would be in attendance, so then we can outfit them with the proper amounts. And ultimately, this hasn't been implemented. We would need to do a pilot program and also gather feedback from the community, how they felt the experience was, if it was a positive experience, if it wasn't, get feedback, improve. But ultimately, if it does prove positive and the community likes it and we find engagement, then we would implement this as our plan. So to conclude, Santa Cruz Public Libraries, like many other organizations, wants to lead a more sustainable and environmentally conscious promotional merchandise. This has been a work in progress, been developing slowly but surely. But at the core of this is to have effective brand marketing while we're also being conscious of the environment and the public greater good. And I think that being strategic about what we purchase and being fiscally but environmentally conscious is a good thing for all of us. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
All right, are there any questions from board members?
I just appreciate this approach to merchandise. I know I get a lot of stuff that gets tossed, so it just goes in the trash. And at a recent conference, I noticed that people were switching more to consumable things. So that might be something that you look into, so that it's not like it's a mint, right, in a package, or something that doesn't get tossed.
Absolutely, yes.
People always like.
Yeah, and I mean, I would be open to talk to local businesses, and I mean, of course, I have to inquire about this, but it's a community effort, right? And so it would be a great thing, not just for us, but also for the community, right? I mean, yes, I think that the idea at the core of this all is that after the pandemic, we've all sort of needed that human connection, and the library lends itself to be that place where we connect. And so this just supports that as part of what we do to connect people. But again, if you have a pleasant experience, you remember that more than the tossable or even the cookie that you get, depending on how good. So, thank you.
Two thoughts on this. Number one is that I love it because I don't even throw it away. I just store it like in the back of the drawer forever, which, you know, I think is probably even a worse outcome. But two thoughts. One is when my son was young, we did an event at the Capitola Branch Library where the library had a 3D printer. And there was the opportunity with the librarian to sort of use the printer. And it was like in the early days, my son's 17 now, and I think he was 7. So that's about 10 years ago. But it was fun, and it was a fun thing. I still remember it, and he printed up like, you know, it was kind of some different templates and selected something and made a little keychain thing and still got it. So that, again, that gets to kind of, I think what you're talking about, it's like that interaction of like something cool about the library. I think that those sorts of things, whether it's like a little hands-on-y activity or something like that. And then I have a expensive, but out of the box idea is like, you know, what would be amazing would be able to have people probably you couldn't, you never afford to, but give away like Kindles, like the lowest cost, like Kindle that's all loaded up, like, hey, you got it. And here's a librarian here who can help you set up your e-account and then use it to check things out. I was looking while you were talking and the cheapest one's $100. So, you know, I don't know how far money would go on something like that, but maybe there's ways, I don't know. It seems like that would be a really interesting kind of long-term engagement tool. And even if it was like you get entered to, you know, you have 50 that we give away in the course of a year or something.
We've got $8 million reserve.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of a way to engage people, I actually found an old Kindle Paperwhite that was living under a bed in my house to get to the point of not throwing things away. Amazingly, it had been there for like 4 or 5 years and it was still charged
Oh, wow.
and I picked it up and I've started reading from it every night here recently, which I hadn't been doing in a while, and so it just got me thinking about
That's a
that.
great idea. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We did have long conversations about how no more water bottles. We don't need to be adding more
Oh,
water
no.
bottles to people's cupboards.
Or
Um,
those cups or anything.
Yeah, and so you did, one of your first orders, were these look plastic, but they're made from wheatgrass,
They're made
right?
from wheat.
So they're sourced a little bit more responsibly sustainable, sorry.
We also have new sets of sunglasses that are made out of wheat straw
Yeah.
fiber, and they're even lighter than plastic and they're biodegradable, so.
The other thing I just wanted to point out, Anna Marie's very first project when she got here was opening this branch, the event opening this branch. So she knows from events, and that was a year ago last week, right? So
Yes.
this is kind of a full circle moment for you.
And I just find it ironic that the weather is.
Yeah, it was wet.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and I'm
Thank you.
excited to share more as this progresses, when it comes to.
And
Thank
from
you.
the Santa Cruz side, we're excited to be working on, you know, refreshing the policy, so aligned there will be great.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay,
You're good to go. Thank you.
all right. Is there any public comment on that item?
I actually have one comment.
Yeah,
My name is Bianca Tangles from CMS. We actually, to complement your presentation, our CMS actually has done this for decades. Because at first, with audiobooks, at first we mostly physical. Like, see books on tape, CD, and then later play with. But now we are more and more towards e-audio, the new platform. With limited physical items, we actually don't toss them right away when it's damaged. We usually say, like, if we have a CD of 10 discs, if number 1 is damaged, we just replace this disc. So this whole item can still be used over and over again until its full retirement. And for playways, we upgrade the device from the simple one to right now HD Lite. And then we still keep the package and the cover art. So it's just kind of like a whole process of being environmentally responsible and fiscally also conscious. So if you want more instances, we have all of this. We don't have too many physical items right now. We still have some, you can see it from Aptar's circulation and their shelves. But what we do is what you say this for the recycle of this environmental. That, yeah, thank you.
thank you so much. Is there any other public comment on this? Yeah.
I'm a librarian, and Susan Nielsen, and I'm a librarian at Santa Cruz Libraries, and I'd like to just talk about doing events. And one event, as an example, is the Peer Youth Leadership Awards. So I actually have a photo, if you want to see it after, of my table that I did. It really was about talking about books. And so I brought all the award winners and I had read, 3/4 of them, and I made a QR code. And that was my gift to them, was this picture of a QR code. So even a kid who doesn't want a thing that their mom might find, ooh, queer books, what's this? Boop, they scan the queer QR code. It leads to our top recommended teen queer books. And that was, and we had the little stickers, the pride stickers that you got, that said SCPL and the rainbow. And that was, I didn't want to give them crummy water bottles. I wanted to give them like, the library is a place for you, queer youth. We have a safe person to talk to. Adults came by and said, wow, there weren't these books when I was a queer young person and they're, in their seventies, and it was just delightful to talk about the books and changes in society and have the library be part of that conversation. And it felt like really meaningful, and like me handing out a water bottle wouldn't have meant anything to those folks. So that's an example of, not focused on the stuff, focused on the connection.
And
Yeah.
to my point, how our staff is our strongest marketing tool.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, it takes us to next order of business, which I think is comments by board members. Do you have any more comments?
Any more comments?
Okay, and then our upcoming meeting schedule, we are still scheduled for 9 o'clock, May 1st in Scotts Valley. With that, we are adjourned.